You believe power requires allies, that strength demands support. But here is the truth few dare confront. Your greatest advantage begins the moment no one stands beside you. In this video, we will expose how to dominate without witnesses, allies, or approval, and why. Those who operate like ghosts often rule the battlefield long after others are forgotten. In the shadows of every empire lies a single figure, unprotected, unseen, yet terrifyingly effective. A ruler who learned early that loyalty is fragile, alliances are temporary, and dependence is a slow death. You are about to step into that realm. To move as a ghost is to reject the comfort of crowds and embrace the purity of self-reliance. It is to understand that influence grows sharper in isolation, that decisions made in silence echo louder than any council's approval, and that a power built alone cannot be betrayed because it owes nothing to anyone. In this lesson, I will guide you through the discipline and psychology needed to dominate when support is non-existent. Not with emotion, nor with hope, but with the cold logic that has crowned rulers and undone nations. Prepare yourself. Power earned alone is power no one can take. Power without allies is not a punishment. It is a removal of chains. Most people cannot understand this because they have never stood alone without trembling. They cling to groups, councils, factions, imagining these things make them strong. But strength borrowed is strength easily taken. And a man tied to others is a man who cannot move without permission. Consider this carefully. What would you become if no one had the ability to hold you back? History offers the clearest lessons. Think of the young Caesar captured by pirates. With no legion, no senate, no ally to rescue him, he relied solely on his mind. Surrounded by enemies and stripped of support, he manipulated the very men who held him. He joked with them, demanded they raise his ransom, and convinced them he was worth more. Alive. Alone, utterly unanchored, he steered the situation using nothing but presence, calm, and a predictable certainty. He would act without waiting for approval, and when he was freed, he returned with a force and crucified them all, fulfilling the promise he had made in captivity. His independence made him dangerous. His lack of support made him free. Now ask yourself, when you stand alone, do you shrink, or do you become unpredictable enough that others must fear misreading you? To be unanchored is to owe nothing, and a person who owes nothing can act faster, strike harder, and shift direction before enemies even understand the game. Dependence creates hesitation, and hesitation is the crack through which your rivals slip a knife. Most people betray themselves through the illusion that alliances protect them. They forget that support is merely rented power. It expires, it erodes. One disagreement, one moment of envy, one opportunity more beneficial to someone else, and the hands that once held you up will push you down. You, however, must learn a different truth. When you walk alone, you do not rely on anyone's loyalty. You rely on their expectations, and then you break them. Think of the strategist who joins no faction at work. Colleagues cannot predict his loyalties, so they watch him carefully. They speak less freely in his presence. They underestimate him, thinking he is isolated. Yet isolation is precisely what gives him the sharpest advantage. While others are busy maintaining alliances, appeasing emotional alliances, and tending to fragile group dynamics, he moves through the environment like a blade, silent, unconnected, and unrestrained. Every choice he makes is his alone, and therefore faster and more decisive than the decisions of any command. There is a psychological principle at play here. The more variables tied to a decision, the less power one has. Most people require reassurance, validation, mutual agreement. You, operating without allies, remove those variables entirely. You act from a singular center, not a collective compromise. This makes your moves dangerous because they cannot be slowed by negotiation or softened by fear of offending your supporters. A person supported by many must maintain the illusion of harmony. A person supported by none must maintain only his resolve. And resolve, unlike alliances, does not betray. But there is another angle, one more subtle, more venomous. When you are unanchored, people cannot read your intentions. They do not know whom you favor, what you want, or what you are willing to destroy. This uncertainty becomes a weapon. Even those who dislike you must tread softly because they fear triggering consequences they cannot predict. A ruler with supporters is easy to target. Break the supporters, and you break the ruler. But a ruler with no visible support forces the enemy to face him directly, and many lack the courage for that. Ask yourself, how dangerous do you become when no one knows what keeps you standing? The answer is simple. You become the one figure no one can corner. When you have no anchors, your movements are limitless. You adapt. You withdraw, you strike, you vanish. You become the strategist who survives storms that crush the powerful because you were never tied to the mast in the first place. Now that you understand the advantage of being unanchored, you must learn the second truth, that silence itself can become a threat, a force more intimidating than armies. Power often reveals itself not in actions but in the silence that precedes them. When a ruler moves without explanation, without ally, without visible preparation, he becomes a specter in the minds of his rivals. They cannot measure him, and therefore they fear him. You have felt this yourself, the unease that grows when someone refuses to show their emotions, intentions, or loyalties. The unknown becomes the weapon. In every court of power, the silent figure is the most dangerous. Not because he is cruel, but because he is unreadable. Once people cannot predict you, they cannot prepare for you. And once they cannot prepare for you, they become slow, anxious, hesitant. Notice how quickly humans fill silence with their own fears. When you reveal nothing, they reveal everything, imagining schemes you have not even planned, handing you advantages you did not ask for. Consider the example of Timur, who often marched his armies without announcing direction or motive. His enemies panicked long before he reached them, destroying their own alliances out of suspicion. The fear did not come from his sword, but from the shadow of his intent. Now imagine applying this in your own life. When you refuse to broadcast your next move, those around you begin inventing dangers that suit their fears, not your plan. The silent threat principle begins in the mind. People fear what they cannot map. That is why the predator unseen is always more terrifying than the predator charging openly. Ask yourself this: when have you felt most threatened? Was it when someone shouted at you, or when someone stared calmly, saying nothing, offering no clue to what they would do next? The quiet person controls the pace because the noisy ones cannot endure uncertainty. In modern environments, silence becomes a psychological chokehold. Imagine a workplace where you neither agree nor disagree immediately. Others rush to interpret your neutrality. They project motives onto you. They wonder whether you support them or oppose them. Their anxiety grows until they make mistakes, and mistakes made from fear are predictable, allowing you to strike with precision. You become the center of tension, not through force, but through the absence of it. Many think silence is passive. It is not. Silence is an active sculptor of perception. Every word you do not say forces others to craft narratives in the dark. Politicians have used this for centuries. Rulers would withhold their stance, observing which faction grew restless, and then strike the one that revealed its ambition too quickly. Humans expose themselves most when trying to guess the thoughts of another, especially when that other is you. To wield silence effectively, you must discipline your impulses. The weak reveal themselves to relieve tension. The strong endure tension to create leverage. When you withhold your reaction, others show theirs. Their fears, insecurities, alliances, and betrayals surface naturally. This is why silence is feared. It turns the battlefield inward. You force the enemy to fight themselves long before they fight you. Their imagination becomes your first weapon. But silence alone is not enough. You must pair it with presence. Your stillness must feel intentional, not accidental. When you enter a room, walk like someone who has already decided the outcome. When you speak, let your words fall slowly, as if each one has weight. People fear the quiet figure who looks like he knows more than he admits. They fear that his silence hides a plan already in motion. Think of the manipulator who sits in meetings saying very little. Others speak freely, trying to fill the void. They contradict themselves, expose weaknesses, promise alliances, and betray others without realizing it. By saying nothing, he gains everything. And when he finally speaks, even a brief sentence carries the force of strategy. This is how influence works when anchored in silence. Every action is magnified because none were wasted. And now you understand the essence of the silent threat principle. Uncertainty is a form of domination. When others cannot define you, they must respect you, if only out of fear of miscalculating. In the next segment, you will discover the deeper truth: how isolation itself can be transformed into a weapon so sharp that even the boldest adversaries hesitate before approaching you. Prepare yourself. Isolation is not a prison. It is the training ground of those who intend to rule without bending. Most people run from solitude because it forces them to confront themselves. But you, if you wish to wield power without dependence, must learn to use isolation as a weapon sharper than any blade. In silence, without support, your mind becomes your fortress, your laboratory, and your armory. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat alone without reaching for distraction? Without seeking comfort? Without leaning on the noise of others to drown your own thoughts? Most people never attempt this. Those who do rarely survive it intact. Yet the ones who emerge are different, colder, clearer, impossible to manipulate. Because once a person is no longer afraid of being alone, no one can threaten him with abandonment. History shows the truth. Look at Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated swordsman who spent years in self-imposed isolation, living in caves, forests, and empty plains. People believe his victories came from skill. They forget they came from solitude. He stripped himself of society until nothing remained but pure focus. Isolation made his mind untouchable. His discipline became terrifying because it came from within, not from the expectations of others. When you embrace solitude, you achieve a similar transformation. You no longer require applause, validation, or reinforcement. You act because the decision is yours, not because a crowd agrees with it. And that is what makes you dangerous. Others constantly negotiate their moves with the world. You negotiate with no one. But isolation does more than strengthen you. It obscures you. You become difficult to read because no one has access to your inner counsel. They cannot gauge who influences you because no one does. They cannot predict your motives because you do not reveal them. They cannot anticipate your actions because there is no external pressure shaping them. This is why rulers through our history withdrew before making decisive moves. They understood that the most potent strategies are born in the dark, not in the company of advisors desperate to preserve their own interests. The mind thinks differently when unobserved, unjudged, and unrestricted. Alone, you can craft strategies that others would never imagine because they are too entangled in social approval to consider them. Reflect on a modern example. The individual at work who keeps to himself. He listens more than he speaks. He avoids unnecessary alliances. He is polite but distant, helpful but unreadable. Notice how people respond to him. They project motives onto him. They worry about what he is thinking. They compete for his approval because he gives none. His isolation becomes authority. His independence becomes mystic. He becomes a figure others discuss, even when he is not present. Isolation, when embraced deliberately, becomes a cloak. It conceals your weaknesses. It hides your doubts. It prevents others from collecting information they could use against you. People cannot attack what they cannot identify, and they cannot manipulate someone who does not need anything from them. But there is a deeper psychological advantage. When you strip away noise, distractions, and external voices, you begin to see patterns others miss. The world becomes clearer because you are no longer reacting to it, you are observing it. And observation is the first step toward domination. You will notice the inconsistencies in people's behavior, the cracks in their confidence, the moments they reveal more than they intend. To wield isolation as a weapon, you must learn to be present in it. Do not use it to escape the world. Use it to study the world. Let solitude sharpen your instincts until you can read others in seconds while revealing nothing of yourself. Let it harden your emotions so no insult, rejection, or betrayal disrupts your equilibrium. Let it discipline your desires so you do not become a puppet to temptation or approval. The strongest rulers were not those surrounded by armies. They were those who could stand alone without trembling. That is the power isolation offers you, the ability to move through the world untouched by its pressures, its gossip, its expectations. And when someone cannot be pressured, they become unstoppable. Now that you know how isolation transforms into a weapon, the next question is simple. What happens when your intentions remain entirely your own, when no one, not even your closest observer, can guess what you plan next? There is a peculiar kind of power that does not rely on strength, wealth, or even reputation. It comes from something far quieter, far more subtle, the power of intentions never spoken. Human beings cannot tolerate a void. When they cannot read you, they begin to invent explanations, and those inventions often elevate you far beyond what you actually are. When your motives are hidden, even ordinary actions gain the illusion of depth. Ask yourself, how often have you overestimated someone simply because you could not understand them? How often did silence feel like wisdom, mystery feel like strength? and ambiguity feel like authority. If you have ever filled those gaps with your own imagination, then you already understand how the unreadable person becomes larger than life. Throughout history, rulers learned that revealing intentions was rarely necessary and often dangerous. Consider the figure of Emperor Hadrian. He traveled across the empire with no clear declarations of long-term plans. His governors, generals, and rivals could not decipher his priorities. Was he preparing for war, reform, consolidation? Because no one knew, they acted cautiously around him, afraid to contradict a direction that might or might not exist. The absence of clarity became its own form of control, not through manipulation, but through the natural human fear of misinterpretation. In truth, people reveal more about themselves when they attempt to interpret you than when you attempt to explain yourself. If someone thinks you are ambitious, they will treat you as if you are. If they imagine you are dangerous, they will tread lightly. Their behavior becomes shaped not by your actual intentions, but by the reflection of their own anxieties. You become a mirror that exposes them. The psychological principle behind this is simple. The mind hates uncertainty. It fills gaps quickly, often irrationally, and almost always according to its dominant emotion. Some will assume your silence means confidence. Others will assume it means superiority. A few will fear it, but almost no one will ignore it. Picture a modern scenario. In a meeting, several people voice their opinions loudly, eager to be heard. And then there is one person quiet, unreadable, watching. The others begin glancing at him. What is he thinking? Does he approve? Does he oppose? Does he have a different plan entirely? They adjust their words. They tread with caution. They give him space he did not have to request. Not because he demanded authority, but because his intentions were a mystery. This phenomenon occurs in every environment. The unreadable individual becomes a psychological center of gravity. People orbit around him, even unintentionally. They prepare for outcomes he has not promised. They anticipate moves he has not considered. Their assumptions create opportunities he did not have to design. You may wonder, is this deception? No, it is perception. The world interprets behavior not as it is, but as it appears. When you are unreadable, your appearance becomes a canvas onto which others project their fears, hopes, and expectations. You hold the advantage not because you mislead them, but because they mislead themselves. Even in personal relationships, this dynamic appears. Consider the friend who maintains a calm, steady presence, revealing little of his inner storms. People begin to see him as the one who always knows what to do, even when he is uncertain. Here, restraint creates an aura of reliability. Another person, equally intelligent but more expressive, loses that aura through transparency. The difference lies not in capability, but in perception shaped by opacity. When your intentions are unshared, people study you more closely. They speak to you more carefully. They approach you with a form of respect that emerges naturally from their own caution. And caution is the seed of influence, not forced but voluntarily given. But there is a deeper layer still. When your plans are private, you become immune to interference. No one can undermine what they cannot identify. No one can block a move they cannot anticipate. You progress quietly, without resistance built from fears you might have unintentionally activated. By remaining unreadable, you avoid creating unnecessary enemies. People cannot oppose what they cannot define. The great irony is this: you do not need to appear powerful. You need only to remain unclear long enough for others to imagine you are. And imagination, once awakened, often becomes more influential than truth. Now that we have explored how hidden intentions shape the minds of others, we must confront the next question. What happens when this unreadable aura evolves from mystery into myth, creating influence before you even speak? Mystery has always been a currency of power, not because it deceives people, but because it forces them to assign value to what they cannot fully see. When someone appears self-contained, distant from the noise, unshaken by praise or criticism, the world instinctively elevates him. They imagine depth where there is only discipline. They sense danger where there is only silence. And they grant authority where none was demanded. Ask yourself, why do people lean toward the unknown with equal parts fascination and fear? Why does a quiet figure often command more attention than the loudest voice in the room? It is because mystery changes perspective. It makes others approach you cautiously, as if you are a force with edges they cannot yet identify. History proves this more clearly than any theory. Consider the rise of the Ottoman Sultan Selim I. He spoke little in council, kept his emotions unreadable, and rarely announced his intention. Even his closest advisors could not predict his decisions. This cultivated an aura so intense that rivals believed he possessed insights they could not comprehend. The mystique itself deterred challenges. His silence cast longer shadows than the armies he commanded. Mystery magnifies presence. Transparency diminishes it. When people understand everything about you, they place you in a category they can control. But when they cannot fully define you, they treat you as something above categorization. And anything above categorization becomes difficult to confront. Reflect on this. Have you ever noticed that the colleague who speaks the least is the one others speculate about the most? They whisper about his potential, his ambition, his possible connections. Even if he has none, silence gives him space to be imagined as someone significant, and significance created through perception often becomes real influence. This is the essence of leverage through mystery. It does not require deceit. It requires restraint. People expect constant explanation, emotional display, and shared motivations. When you break that expectation, they pay attention. Their curiosity becomes your advantage. Their uncertainty becomes your shield. Their projections become your atmosphere. Mystery is not about hiding. It is about refusing to be obvious. Look at the psychological mechanics at play. The human mind is pattern-seeking. It wants clarity, predictability, answers. When confronted with ambiguity, it becomes restless, searching for meaning where none has been provided. This restlessness makes people watch you more closely. They analyze your posture, your tone, your timing. They imagine motives behind your smallest actions. And that analysis elevates you because the observer invests mental energy into defining you, energy they do not spend on anyone else. Over time, this investment creates a powerful illusion. They begin to believe you operate at a level they must decipher rather than confront. They soften their approach, choose their words carefully, and hesitate before disagreeing, not because you demanded respect, but because the uncertainty surrounding you imposed it. The great strategist is not the one who reveals every thought, but the one whose presence suggests a depth that others must uncover, even when that depth is simply the discipline to remain quiet until speaking has purpose. In daily life, this principle appears everywhere. The person who does not rush to reply becomes seen as thoughtful. The person who does not justify himself becomes seen as self-assured. The person who does not display every emotion becomes seen as composed. None of these impressions require manipulation. They emerge naturally from restraint. Mystery also protects you. When people cannot fully interpret you, they hesitate to make assumptions. They avoid reckless challenges. They fear miscalculating your boundaries. Even your mistakes appear intentional because people attribute strategy to your silence. This is not trickery, it is the psychological power of selective expression. But notice this carefully. Mystery is strongest when it is grounded in consistency. You cannot be unreadable one moment and overly expressive the next. You must cultivate steadiness and inner stillness that feels deliberate. Mystery grows in the space where predictability ends. Ask yourself now, what would happen if you became someone others could not easily define? Someone whose motives were not displayed, whose reactions were measured, whose presence carried more questions than answers. Most people show too much and lose the advantage. The few who show little gain the authority others unknowingly surrender. And now that you understand the leverage created by mystery, we move to the next, sharper edge, where independence turns into inevitability, and self-reliant action begins to shape the entire field around you. There comes a moment when silence, mystery, and isolation are no longer enough. A moment when perception must be matched with motion. Power that stays still becomes myth. Power that moves becomes reality. And the individual who acts without seeking permission, approval, or applause becomes a force others cannot slow. This is the essence of self-reliant action. The ability to move as if your direction is its own justification. Ask yourself, how many decisions have you delayed because you waited for someone to validate them? How many opportunities have you watched slip away while weighing the opinions of those who contributed nothing to your progress? Most people hesitate because they fear judgment more than failure, but the person who acts independently moves faster than the world can restrain. History is shaped by such figures. Consider Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. His advisors hesitated, his allies warned him, and his enemies prepared to condemn him. Yet he acted alone, decisive, unstoppable. The river was shallow, but the act was deep. Because he did not seek approval, every force aligned against him became reactive rather than proactive. His independence became momentum. His momentum became fate. This is how self-reliant action works in any era. The one who does not wait controls the pace. When you act with quiet certainty, you impose your rhythm on the environment. People become responders to your initiative. They adjust to you. They rationalize around you. They attempt to catch up to a direction you have already chosen. Even when they disagree, they do so from behind. Yet independence is not recklessness. It is clarity. It comes from refining your judgment in solitude, disciplining your emotion, and understanding the consequences well enough to accept them. Once you do, action becomes natural, unburdened by the fear that cripples the indecisive. Observe how this plays out in modern life. There is always one individual who does not ask for consensus before making a move. He applies for the promotion before others consider themselves ready. He starts a project without waiting for permission. He learns a skill in private and reveals it only through results. People label him bold, confident, sometimes arrogant, but they watch him. And watching gives him influence. When you move without hesitation, people assume you know something they do not. They attribute strategy to your speed. They imagine preparation behind your decisiveness. This perception strengthens you further. Even when your action was simply the product of inner discipline, self-reliant action removes negotiation from your path. You are no longer slowed by committees of uncertain minds. You are not tangled in the expectations of those who fear change. You are not diluted by the hesitations of the crowd. You move, and the world adapts. But there is another psychological dimension. When you act independently, you demonstrate that you are not ruled by others' emotions. You are not waiting for someone to grant you courage. You are not seeking reassurance from those who lack it themselves. This steadiness creates an aura that others find difficult to confront. People grow cautious around someone who does not need them. Have you noticed how the person who depends on nothing becomes harder to control, harder to guilt, harder to influence? Independence is not merely a tool, it is protection. Those who rely on the approval of others are easily redirected. Those who act for themselves cannot be steered by praise or criticism. And yet the greatest advantage of self-reliant action is this: you become inevitable. When your behavior does not fluctuate according to external pressure, people begin to accept your direction as something they cannot alter. Over time, they stop resisting. They adapt to your consistency. They follow not because they were persuaded, but because your unwavering motion created its own path. Even your mistakes become less damaging because others assume you have reasons they do not yet understand. Independence creates the illusion of mastery, and mastery, whether real or perceived, draws both respect and caution. But understand this clearly: you must act with purpose, not noise. Those who brag about their next move lose the advantage. Those who announce their intentions dilute their impact. True self-reliance is quiet. It is the ability to move decisively without narrating your strategy to the world. Now ask yourself, what would your life become if you removed the need for approval from every major decision? What momentum could you create? What would shift if you acted from inner command rather than external permission? Most people never discover this power. The ones who do reshape their environment simply by refusing to wait for permission. And now that you understand the force of self-reliant action, we reach the final truth, where your independence, your silence, and your movement combine into something far greater than influence, something approaching inevitability itself. When you understand how control truly works, you stop chasing obedience and start cultivating dependence. People are not ruled by force. They are ruled by the illusions they willingly carry. You have seen how subtle influence eclipses overt command, how a gentle suggestion can outweigh a shouted order, and how the most powerful chains are the ones the victim never notices tightening. Ask yourself, is it domination if they believe the choice was theirs? Is it manipulation if they thank you for guiding them? This is the quiet architecture of power. Influence built in shadows. Authority disguised as concern. Control wrapped in the comfort of familiarity. Those who master this never need to raise their voice, never need to reveal their intentions. Because the world bends most easily to the one who appears not to be bending it at all. So reflect on what you've learned here. Study it. Use it with precision, or risk being used by those who already do. And now your turn. Comment your thoughts below. Subscribe for more strategies forged in the darker chambers of human nature. Share this video with those who believe they cannot be controlled, and watch how quickly the illusion breaks.